Good morning, everyone. I think it's 11:33, so we should get started. I want to welcome you to the public meeting for the Homestead-to-McKeesport Transit and Pedestrian Improvement Project, where we'll be discussing proposed conceptual improvements along PA State Route 837. I'm going to turn over to David Huffaker from PRT, who will get us started.
Thank you, Serena, and welcome. Good morning, everyone. As you heard, my name is David Huffaker. I'm the Chief Finance and Development Officer here at PRT, and I would just like to welcome you all to our online public meeting for the Homestead-to-McKeesport project. Homestead-to-McKeesport project. We're really excited to be working on this one, which we're hoping is going to make it easier and safer for people to get to bus stops, and adding amenities to the bus stops that will improve our overall experience, as well as improving the transit speed and reliability. So this includes transit upgrades between Homestead and McKeesport, generally along the State Route 837 corridor. Serving the 61C and 4 other bus routes along this corridor. The existing conditions data shows a high need for improvements that would benefit our multiple bus routes and improve the pedestrian access more broadly, hopefully also complementing other activities in the surrounding communities. So I look forward to hearing your feedback, and our project team will take that into consideration as we continue to evolve our concepts. So with that, let me turn it over to the project team, and you can hear more about this great project. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Before we start, just a step back. I want to take a moment to talk through some quick housekeeping elements. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Engage PGH website specifically for this project. The website will also be updated with additional material. Yes, I will show closed captioning. Thank you for that. So the website will include the presentation and material afterwards, where you can keep going to the website and engaging and sharing comments as they come to you. If you have any questions throughout, we ask that you put it in the chat function. The team will be monitoring the chat to make sure that all comments are addressed. Once we open up for a Q&A, please unmute yourself and raise your hand if you have a question. We do have an ASL interpreter available. Chad Barnett and Amy Ahern will be switching the interpretation role, and they are pinned and spotlighted in this presentation. If you can't see them, please pin them in your own Zoom that you've joined. If you have any technical difficulties, chat May Catino, and she will be able to help you. And then if you're finally joining by phone, press *6 to mute and unmute, or *9 to raise your hand. Thank you. I will hand off the meeting to Seth Davis from PRT to take us through the material.
Thank you, Serene, and thank you, David. Thank you all for joining us this morning. As Serene said, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Engage website, engage.rideprt.org/H2M. And we'll also be uploading some of the concepts and other iterations that you'll see throughout this presentation on the site for folks to engage into after this meeting. So the goals of today's public meeting are to provide a brief project background and overview, confirm what we've heard from the community in terms of needs and opportunities along the corridor, and discuss bus stop balancing considerations, as well as share preliminary concepts across the corridor for transit and pedestrian improvements. Finally, we'll talk next steps and how this project will go forward following this round of public engagement. Stepping into an overview of Homestead and McKeesport, or how we've called it internally and externally, H2M. The overall geographic scope of this effort starts at the base of the Homestead Grays Bridge at 8th Avenue and moves to PRT's McKeesport Transportation Center. And PRT selected this project via a set of safety analysis, ridership volume, and equity. And our equity index factors are shown in an image on the page. There are a set of equity index factors that are protected under what is known as Title VI, and also the Americans with Disabilities Act. PRT has added a set of metrics showing that there are populations with higher reliance on public transportation. So that was a main factor for selecting this project and prioritizing it within PRT. The overall 3 project goals are to improve rider safety and accessibility, improve our riders' experience, and improve the speed and reliability of transit service in this corridor. So why is PRT, or why are we all here to invest in transit on PA Route 37? Our next transit long-range plan was adopted by the board in fall of 2021 and included 17 priority corridors. H2M is the first corridor planning project that's being implemented from a planning and future implementation perspective. These proposed improvements will improve access to the downtown Pittsburgh to Oakland bus rapid transit corridor that is coming online and beginning construction this fall. And PA 37 also experiences one of the highest service delays in the Mon Valley, with over 7,500 transit riders through 8th Avenue and Homestead, demonstrating a high need and high demand that already exists. So this will also be a project that is continuing to support the revitalization and development, not only on 8th Avenue Business District, but across the corridor. So how did we get here? In the fall of 2021, this was launched as an internal PRT project, and there was initial engagements of existing conditions and analysis. We brought that forward to a couple public workshops to gain feedback on the corridor and desired improvements. And following that round of public engagement, we brought a consultant team on board to support the remaining stages of the project. In the fall of 2022, there was significant data collection, modeling, and other elements with initial developed corridor concepts based on general public input, our work with our project partners and stakeholders, as well as internal PRT departments. The gold star highlighted here in summer and fall of 2023 is where we are right now. We're considering this a second round or second phase of public engagement to review some initial and refined concepts, as well as working towards developing the final concept this fall and an implementation plan that will occur in winter of 2023. So our approach to corridor planning, we've already discussed it: rider safety and accessibility, making it easier and safer for folks to access transit stops, improving our riders' experience, ensuring that the facilities in adjacent areas are more comfortable and attractive, and also focusing on improving the speed and reliability of transit service. This is a cycle that goes through an internal committee, work with our project partners, and coming to you as the public, as well as government officials, community members, and stakeholders to refine this process. So there's been a long list of stakeholder engagement to date. We sort of touched on it already, starting with partner and community stakeholders back in the fall of 2021, and several rounds of different engagement internally, externally, with project partners, with community stakeholders, and finally, most recently coming back to the project partners again. And when we talk project partners, that's working with Allegheny County, working with PennDOT District 11, and also the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, or the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region. So just a quick touch on what happened previously in public meeting round 1 for those that participated in that round of public outreach. Some of the elements you'll see today will be familiar from that process, but the team has really been working in the background with those that control the road segments in the corridor to ensure any of the proposals that you'll see today will be implementable and will work with any changes that they're making along the corridor. So as we're going to step forward into some of the existing conditions and background analysis, we're also going to touch on opportunities for bus stop balancing in the corridor. So existing transit in the corridor area, in the H2M corridor, as David Huffaker touched on earlier, there's 5 key bus routes here, including the 61C, the P7, the 59, the 52L, and 53L. There are also several routes that move through the waterfront area, and the waterfront, while changes through this study aren't part of this scope, we know it is an important factor and important destination for folks that may be using this corridor, using routes on this corridor. Typically, there are 200 buses versus a 15,000 average daily traffic on this corridor in 8th Avenue. So anytime about 10% of the people moving through the 8th Avenue business district are traveling via bus. Some of that existing conditions analysis that the team talked about earlier are shown on the screen here, and we're looking at average bus speeds in the PM and AM peaks, and we're talking crashes and pedestrian volumes, and you really start to see, there's a link here and on the site that shows this previous analysis, but what the team really started to see is there's several focus areas where consistently we're seeing speed impacted, but we're also seeing crashes and high pedestrian volumes, and we want to dig into those focus areas through the work of this study. So just to touch on PRT's bus stop balancing process, why does PRT have a stop consolidation or balancing process? And the overall goal is to balance the number of stops we have to improve a few different factors: on-time performance, reliability of the service, and have the ability to focus rider amenities and overall experience amenities around specific areas through a multi-phased effort. Typically, we have a minimum of 600 feet between stops, and the corridor in some places shows that we're hovering around 500 feet or even closer in certain areas. So several factors are included in terms of stop utilization, slope and topographical conditions, proximity to key community anchors. But there's different guidelines on the screen here. The table at the bottom has the breakdown of spacing across our different route conditions. And that's how this team has sort of faced the metrics and applied that to this corridor. So existing versus proposed stops in the area. So throughout the corridor, there is going to be a proposed or recommended reduction of stops, and the proposed reduction of stops really focus on stops that have been identified as deficient or have other issues that are highlighted or just don't work from a functionality or spacing perspective. But what the importance that we are bringing forward is to better serve riders' needs. There will be shelters, additional amenities, and recommendations for closing sidewalk gaps where possible, and working with our stakeholders in the communities, as well as our project partners, to close those gaps before any of these consolidations or balancing recommendations are put forward. So in both directions, inbound, there are existing 32 stops. In the outbound direction, there are 34 stops. So when we talk inbound, that's northbound heading towards Homestead, and outbound, southbound heading towards McKeesport. So in the inbound towards Homestead direction, there are 32 stops, of which 25 are rated as deficient via the analysis of this project. And in the outbound direction, there are 34 stops, and 16 of which are rated deficient. The new proposal will have 23 stops in both directions, typically paired up inbound and outbound. And where there are shelters currently, those will be improved, and there will be 8 new shelters across those stops, as well as additional amenities as this project continues to evolve. Stepping forward. So the area where you'll see some of the most bus stop balancing recommendations are in the Homestead and Munhall area. 8th Avenue is relatively well connected from a sidewalk network. We know it's not perfect in every area, but in Homestead and Munhall, there's a pretty good sidewalk infrastructure, pretty good network before you start heading up the hill. The walk shed analysis shows good connectivity. So there are recommendations here to bring the stops into a PRT's guidelines. But with those changes, we want to also bring forward amenity improvements in many of those locations as well. So if a few stop pairs are being removed and consolidated towards nearby adjacent stops, the largest shift to the nearest stop may be about 630 feet, but there is a closer stop in the other direction. So similar in Munhall, there's a lot of crossover here with where Homestead and Munhall touch together, and similar recommendations, and the largest change would only be about the same 630 feet. There's no recommended balancing right now in McKeesport other than a small adjustment, and we'll touch on why things aren't changing on Lyle Boulevard more significantly later in the presentation, but just want to highlight there is a stop location that is being proposed to have a minor adjustment, and we'll get into those details going forward. Before we step into the key intersection improvement opportunities, Serene, I just want to see if there's any comments we need to move back to before we jump into the intersection improvements.
Yes, thanks, Seth. There was a question about the 53L, I think, and the possibly service improvements along the corridor for that one, and the 61C. This is from Joy Door.
So those are great questions, and PRT is just on the cusp or in the background has launched the network redesign study. So this project isn't really undertaking any routing changes or routing improvements or service improvements at this time, but your question will be sent to the team at PRT that is undertaking any of those routing considerations and the network redesign and funneling those considerations in there. I will emphasize that we are focused on this corridor as it will remain important not only today, but in the future with the network redesign as well. And I'm going to step it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
One more question, I think, on a comment that came up, and I think you'll highlight it in this next section, is the sidewalks adjacent to the bus stops, and that's being something that limits accessibility to seniors and riders with disabilities. I think
that's certainly well understood, and there will be. This project is taking really these concepts to what would be known as a 10% design level, and after these concepts are confirmed or we make adjustments and changes, we're really going to move towards implementation. And that will include analyzing the nearest sidewalk infrastructure, analyzing some of those existing crosswalk conditions, as well as making recommended improvements. So that'll be forthcoming. So as we talk about the key intersection improvements, what has really happened is a systems approach or a kit of parts that the team has applied across the corridor. So you'll see images at the bottom of the slide here talking about pedestrian refuge islands, curb extensions that often can be paired with stormwater improvements to help any drainage issues. And also there will be elements, what we call queue jump lanes or transit lanes. For those that may have seen some of the red paint in the downtown Pittsburgh area, there will be considerations like that coming forward with this project. So many of them have different features that are going to play with reducing exposures for pedestrians and also reducing the potential for higher vehicle speeds and higher volumes. So all of these are going to work together throughout the concepts that you'll see today to really come together and make a holistic improvement as when they've come to full fruition. Stepping into the Homestead and Munhall section first, we do have 4 areas we're going to highlight through this presentation. While improvements are being recommended across several areas, this is what we want to talk about today because many of these improvements could be carried forward at multiple intersections. So the 4 areas we're going to look at in Homestead and Munhall are at the 8th Avenue and Grays Bridge at West Street, 8th Avenue and Amity Street, 8th Avenue at Library Place, and finally 8th Avenue at Ravine Street for this segment within Homestead and Munhall. Oops. So stepping into the area at the base of the Homestead Grays Bridge and West Street, the existing conditions right now, if you went out there today, a lot of the pavement markings aren't really visible. There's other signage and elements that aren't visible as well, but it also has a large set of crossing distances for folks that are trying to accommodate this intersection. There is a crossing underneath the back of the bridge that really forces folks off of 8th Avenue to move towards the bridge and underneath. That isn't the most comfortable crossing, and what was observed in the field is a lot of people are still crossing at these pretty wide intersections. So the intent of the proposal is to step back and reduce those crossing distances and focus on giving people a little more comfortable crossing and safer spaces to get across the intersection. This may look familiar for any folks that have been in the East Carson Street area with the newly renovated portion at the base of the Birmingham Bridge. And even going farther back, this is sort of an element that has been seen at the 62nd Bridge in Lawrenceville and Butler Street. So what the intent is to control these different movements that already happen today, not restrict any of the movements, but control them so there's protected crossing phases for pedestrians and also a little more consistent movement where folks are coming through the intersection. This is a PennDOT truck route, so all existing truck traffic will continue to be accommodated, as well as our larger buses known as articulated or 60-foot buses. So stepping in and looking at it all at once, what this reconstructed intersection will do is focus on improving pedestrian safety and overall traffic flow. Some of that will happen via shorter crossing distances, but shorter signal cycles as well. The existing bus stops will be relocated or shifted to Amity Street, and we'll step forward to that in the next slide. This is just a rendering of what this may look like on the ground, showing some of these refuge island areas and crossing areas, and we will continue to take that forward and evolve as the design is tweaked. So I want to step into this one because these intersections are going to work together, but this is at 8th Avenue and Amity Street, the existing conditions. The framework is a little bit tighter. You can see the crossing markings, but what the team is recommending is the consideration of a fully upgraded intersection that actually includes what you may see what we're calling queue jump lanes. What happens at the existing intersection at the base of the Homestead, Grace Bridge and West Street is often our buses aren't able to curb or choose not to curb to serve ADA folks that may need a ramp or those that are using a mobility device. Often if our bus stays in lane and away from the curb, they can't deploy that ramp and folks may not be able to access it. There's a combination of factors at play here where the operators don't have a desire to curb because they can't get back into traffic or they get caught in traffic affecting their running time or affecting reliability of the route. What this balancing or consolidation of stops here at 8th Amity intends to do is allow consistent curbing, allow space for the buses to move out of general traffic and get to the curb and have that dedicated space. Also be paired with some signal improvements to allow them to then once again get back into general traffic, or as it said, queue jump around the queue and get back into traffic and ahead and keep moving down the route in both directions. Just looking at it overall, you'll see that the distance, for some may not be significant, but there are elements here that are at play and the intersections will work together. The Homestead Grace Bridge has a future rehab that will be led by the county. That this intersection is going to require a lot of collaboration with the county and our project partners, and we've already held discussions with them and highlighted the initial concepts that you'll see today. Continuing step forward, I think this is a prompt that is timely. 8th Avenue at accessible signals would be concluded and upgraded to include elements for the blind and some auditory measurements, but that'll come further in the implementation and financing plan. So just saw that comment there, but I also saw a question about 8th Avenue at Library Place as well as William Marks Drive. So this existing intersection is really representative of what may have happened if the waterfront was continued developed or there was a secondary entrance to the waterfront district identified. So what this street design or geometry of the intersection represents is a much higher volume of traffic in different movements with the slip lanes, what are known as slip lanes and different turning movements. That really hasn't been shown through the modeling or field observations or traffic counts to need that level of geometry or capacity. So the team is recommending tightening up the intersection to be more straightforward and have more typical movements that you would see based on the volume, and really infill behind it either green space or other elements, but give a more straightforward sidewalk presence, more straightforward design, but also bring our bus pairs together in a closer nature than they are right now. The bus stop, especially on the inbound side, really sits far back from this intersection. And it does that because of the nature and design of the slip lanes and other elements here. So what this is intended to do, bring those pairs together, infill the space, accommodate our riders in a more typical fashion, and give closer access to where people want to be or where we understand there's some desire to be closer to different points of interest on this corridor. This is just a rendering in a three-dimensional view that you can see some of those changes and how it's impacted, and these pairs will work more together. You'll have the opportunity to go more towards Library Place and up the hill towards the Carnegie Library of Homestead, and then be a little closer to some of the amenities there that are off of William Marks Drive without being so far back. What the redesigned intersection should also do is reduce vehicle speeds, reduce some of those more dangerous or faster turning movements that are allowed by the current design. Oops. So going a little farther, this is getting towards the edge of Munhall or edge of 8th Avenue in the more dense pedestrian type of network. So this is at 8th Avenue and Ravine Street. This is one of the last stops sort of in this community, and the existing road geometry and design really, and bus stop locations create an uncomfortable condition for those that may be accessing transit, and the existing stops are really outside of our accessibility guidelines and spacing guidelines. So what the team is recommending is really changing some of the geometry there, shifting the inbound stop to an area that has a little more right-of-way space, so there's actually can be a sidewalk stub, shelter, and other elements there, and get a much safer pairing of stops, and also reducing or adjusting some of the roads infrastructure to calm traffic and maybe reduce some of those faster turning movements here in this location. So just before we step forward, I want to give the folks an opportunity, and Serene, if there's anything highlighted in the chat, but we want to know if there's anything else happening in this segment that PRT needs to know about. I've seen a couple items come through the chat, but also any specific concerns or additional considerations about the proposed improvements. We will be addressing many of the comments that we've seen in the chat, but we want to know if you use these stops right now, and if you do, what other elements would improve some of your transit experience in this portion of the corridor.
Thanks, Ed. I think one question that came up in the chat was about traffic calming and speed limits throughout the corridor, but if we can address it specifically in this section.
Yes, so I mean, the right-of-way, while it falls in Homestead, Munhall, and others, is a PennDOT right-of-way or PennDOT road. So often they control some of the signing of speed, but what we're recommending and what we believes we're recommending will assist in some of that traffic calming programs. So I saw a question about radar. It's not permitted by the state in terms of allowing local municipalities to use radar, but we're focusing on a more engineering perspective, because enforcement or radar enforcement isn't consistent unless automated. Engineering and changing the roadway infrastructure is much better from a traffic calming perspective. So what we're showing today should fall in line with those proposals for some traffic calming, and we're going to keep working forward with PennDOT, the municipalities, to confirm those elements. And should all of these things be implemented going forward, there may be an opportunity for signage or speed limit changes. Okay, anything else, Serene? Yes, the traffic and pedestrian signals will be updated to help reduce or provide more consistency, provide longer crossing times for pedestrians, provide just more straightforward changes. And that's going to be proposed with these elements that'll be paired with signal changes as well.
I think there's nothing else in the chat, but if anyone wants to speak specifically, we will have a Q&A at the end, but if there's any questions or input specifically about this segment, you can unmute and share your input.
Do the attendees have the opportunity to raise their hand if they do want to be sort of highlighted, Serene?
They should be able to.
Okay, yeah, so please raise your hand, and if you have a comment specific, but just being cognizant of time, I want to keep pushing forward, and so we do leave plenty of Q&A opportunity and the ability to come back to different slides. So moving forward, we're calling this sort of the Kennywood and Duquesne segment of the corridor. And what you see here is we have two highlights known as the number 5 and number 6 key concept highlight here at Kennywood Boulevard and Hoffman Boulevard, right on the edge of West Mifflin and Duquesne, and then also 2nd Avenue and Grant Street within Duquesne. We know there's other opportunities in this segment, and certainly if there's areas that you'd like to highlight, drop them in the chat or ask a question, and we'll continue to analyze portions of this segment. So stepping into the first one, this is the part of 8th Avenue that's known as Kennywood Boulevard and Hoffman Boulevard. This is the existing infrastructure and geometry of the site. Just for full disclosure of what happens here, when Kennywood is open, the bus routes or the PRT bus route 61C services within Kennywood's parking lot, closer to the entrance here. What you'll see in recommendations is actually for PRT to bring the bus stops to P837 or Kennywood Boulevard year round. Part of what this is going to be, this is going to need further coordination with Kennywood as well as project partners to make this work for all parties as well as the public. We know this shift is a major change from what currently happens, but part of that change and unknown with the bus servicing internal to Kennywood really provides some conflicts for our riders, but also really impacts operations when our buses get caught up in some of that general traffic infrastructure, especially at closing. Our buses are losing a lot of time and really impacting ridership reliability for folks accessing transit. So with this proposal, there will be other, and I'll touch on it in a future slide, but what this will do is bring the inbound and outbound stops to a year-round location on P837. There's going to be an opportunity for sidewalk extensions, sidewalk improvements, as well as some other considerations for shelter and amenities in these areas. What's happening here, and this is a three-dimensional view to show where the shelters would potentially be proposed or located, but what's important to note here is that we will continue to coordinate with Kennywood if this is a shift that happens, to identify a permanent direct route, accessible route to the main entrance, so that there's really not a loss of what's happening today, but an improvement and an improved opportunity and more consistent opportunity going forward with this proposal. So when we get into future phases of this project and the final implementation plan, this will be prioritized in a way that there will be a phased step to this, that these stops won't shift here until we've identified that connection to Kennywood's entrance. I do want to highlight that to the north of this intersection is the employee access, and Kennywood does have an employee gate at this location and does have a large number of transit riders that they estimate using the service that are employees of the park. So I think there's a question about signals. The details of the signals, and once again, the signals are owned typically by the municipality. So we're going to work with the municipalities to put packages together based on prioritizations from this project, but also they typically control sidewalk infrastructure and other elements. So what's going to be taken forward, we're going to work with the municipalities to identify funding streams and identify other elements going forward to get this funded and to upgrade equipment where it's necessary to support the service. I do see a comment there from Dave Totten regarding the curb extension at Hoffman rather than a queue jump lane. But in hearing what criteria is proposed, this is an element that we're going to work with and confirm. And I think, Dave, we can talk about it in more detail going forward. And yes, Joy highlights the Giant Eagle and restaurants. So once again, PRT doesn't control the ability for or construction of sidewalks on Hoffman Boulevard, but we do want to recommend to West Mifflin and others that do control the right of way or the construction of sidewalks. These are important, critical connections, especially those that may be accessing the 61C, to make that connection to areas that transit riders are trying to access. Continue to step forward into Duquesne, and we can certainly come back, and I do want to give folks time for questions. But this is at 2nd Street and Grant Avenue, the existing conditions, and I do want to step forward. What will be proposed here is a shifting or balancing of stops to be consolidated, so that if you are making a transfer and you are accessing a different route, that you know where you're going to board the bus in either direction, and just providing a consolidated outbound stop for some of these elements, extending the curbs, improving the sidewalk striping, potentially recommending a raised crossing in general. And I'll step in the next slide because it's a little easier to see what'll be happening here. But this is just, and we want to work with Duquesne to confirm desires or any changes they're making in the street geometry, but just provide a better overall rider experience at this stop or these sets of stops. I think there's been a couple questions in the chat, but I don't know if there's anything I missed, Serene, before we step into the next segment.
Nope, I think you covered most of them.
Okay. Once again, if there are folks in these areas not only just living but accessing them typically, we're happy to answer specific questions, but we do want to know if you're using these stops, and if there's items we've missed where you feel that they'll highlight improvements, please let us know. And we know there's a lot of changes or potential changes that we may have missed as well that we're not aware of currently. I do want to highlight our Duquesne Park and Ride does sit within this segment, and there's future opportunity there to analyze usage, but also changes that could happen there from a transit-oriented design perspective as well. Right now, there may be other changes that'll be updated in Duquesne, but there'll be similar treatments to what you saw there at 2nd Street and Grant Avenue. And we would like direct connection with Duquesne. We hadn't had an opportunity, or I know they've had a lot of change in staff, so we're happy to work with Duquesne to confirm some of their ideas, but we've referenced some of the comprehensive planning that has happened in Duquesne and jointly with McKeesport, but we will keep working forward with that. Certainly, here, well heard, Nicole. There are several stops that need upgrades and benches and shelters, and that's part of an overall analysis, so thank you for that comment. So stepping forward into the McKeesport segment, just an overview of stops here. Today, you're only going to see one recommendation or change right now, and that's because there is future opportunity on Lyle Boulevard for more holistic changes. And those will have to be partnered with not only McKeesport, but the county and PennDOT as well. And we do want to advocate for those going forward, but there's one specific change that we're going to get into in detail. And that's at the Fifth Avenue area at near the McKeesport-Duquesne Bridge, where a lot of the ramp infrastructure is going on, or the 61C accesses the ramp infrastructure to get onto the other side of the river. So what's being proposed here, and this will require some consistent further coordination, because what we're proposing is a pedestrian actuated traffic signal where the bus would be able to service the stop in either direction moving past the crosswalk. A rider or somebody accessing the stop would then be able to go towards the back of the bus, actuate a button and press a button to cross, and have a light, make a red light for traffic that's happening here. 4 lanes of traffic can at times be very fast. And this is one of the last stops in McKeesport heading inbound that folks can access a 61C service going all the way to downtown on a 1-seat ride. Just off the screen here, there are several housing buildings through the McKeesport Housing Authority and others, where it is difficult to access this stop because of the ramp infrastructure and because of the topographical changes here. So what's being proposed is an extension of a sidewalk and identifying an accessible path from Pearl Street, because it is difficult currently to get from Pearl Street to the stop, but we're going to work with our partners, and the ramp infrastructure is definitely a barrier for the 61C. In a perfect world, we'd be able to route the 61C closer to these locations, but that same ramp infrastructure that's a barrier is also difficult for our bus to get off of that infrastructure, access the housing areas, and get back on without a significant loss of time for those that may be going the whole ride from the McKeesport Transportation Center all the way to downtown. So a lot of factors at play here, but we feel this confident in a change and recommendation for a signal, as well as identifying closing some of the sidewalk gaps or accessibility gaps in this area as much as possible through what we can control. All right. So I do want to highlight a couple potential future projects. There's one I touched on earlier in a Homestead Grays Bridge future rehab going on with the county coming down the pipe, but there's also an opportunity on Lyle Boulevard that the road diet or other reimagining of McKeesport, Lyle Boulevard through McKeesport. So I talked about some traffic modeling that happened early on in the project, and everything was analyzed from an existing traffic flow, and any of the improvements or recommendations you've seen today either improve or do not change the existing traffic flow or what PennDOT likes to see in terms of level of service. What the team analyzed here was that McKeesport or Lyle Boulevard in McKeesport would be considered over capacity from a number of lanes, from speeds, from a lot of different factors here. So there's an opportunity for reimagining Lyle Boulevard to be more transit supportive, be more pedestrian supportive, as well as provide some amenities there in terms of changing over from future development. We know McKeesport's working on a couple demolition projects that are hopefully setting themselves up for future development. So we're going to continue working with McKeesport as well as any other partners in the area to think about how, one, we fund a study focused specifically on Lyle Boulevard, but also partner with the team that is pursuing active transportation updates in this area. And active transportation usually are folks that may be walking, using mobility devices or bikes or other means other than vehicular travel. Another one highlighted, you didn't see any changes today near the Rankin Bridge. And that's because there's a lot of complicated road design or geometry with the ramps and how the current signals operate today. But we know there's a couple of projects that the county has in the future years that are going to work on holistic changes to the bridge. And that represents a lot of opportunities for us to consider some signal changes, how the bus moves through there, how folks may be using the Rankin Bridge to access the Gap Trail through a couple unidentified or unimproved trail segments to the Gap Trail. But we're certainly open to working with them, and we've already highlighted that in our discussions with the county DPW and the county economic development department. So I know I think I'm going to keep touching on future projects, but if I didn't see any specific comments come up, once again, please raise your hand if there's something specific you would want to talk about in McKeesport, but I'm going to keep moving forward if I don't hear anything else. Serena, is there anything I missed?
No, overall, I think support for the Fifth Ave location that you shared,
Okay.
and the needed pedestrian improvements there, and some continued comments from Joy about just making sure we reach city and Hazelwood residents.
Yes,
through the public meetings.
we'll make sure there's going to be, I'll touch on some opportunities for pop-ups going forward, but we'll certainly push this out and be more prescriptive in where we're looking these items. So next step and future, as I highlighted the timeline, I want to highlight it again. We're here in the summer and fall of 2023. This is a project that's been long on PRT's work plan and also internal work plan, but we're closing up this round that I said is only going to take parts of this project to what it would be known as sort of a 10% engineering design. We know there's a lot more work to gain additional funding and gain additional support, but we're going to continue to work with our stakeholders, continue to gain public feedback, and come back with an implementation plan later this fall and later this winter. I just want to highlight at the bottom, you can go to the engagement page, and once again, engage.rideprt.org/H2M. And these concepts and other elements will be built out there and also have direct feedback on specific areas. So there'll be another round of public meetings in the fall, like I said, or later towards that transition to winter. We're also planning several pop-ups, potentially at the McKeesport International Village or other community events throughout the corridor. We also plan to we'll identify dates to be at our transportation center, the Duquesne Bark and Ride, and potentially at the library of Homestead, as well as other areas in the segment. I do want to touch on, we will be in the corridor tomorrow for an in-person open house where we'll have boards with these slides. You can provide direct feedback on some of the proposals there, dig into them a little bit deeper. There's going to be some refreshments and open house style, but that's going on tomorrow afternoon in evening from 6 p.m. to 7:30. So I wanted to give plenty of time for a question and answer session. I know we might have moved through a lot of detail pretty quickly, but happy to bounce back and move back if there's something specific that the group wants to highlight, or once again, if from my PRT team and the consultant team, if there's anything I missed. So happy to step backward. Anything in the chat, Serene?
No, I think most of them were addressed. I think one more comment from Cheryl just on the future projects, and I think from Swain, it was about both the Rankin Bridge and Lyle Boulevard being potential future opportunities to make great improvements there. But as you mentioned, those are things that we will continue to work on.
I see Swain had a comment about lots of missing sidewalks and signals. No, certainly agreed. And that's why some of the sidewalk gaps are being evaluated. And you'll see other programs coming out of PRT to prioritize some of those closures of sidewalk gaps or infrastructure gaps throughout the corridor. So great points. And we are continually working with our partners to close some of those gaps throughout the corridor.
Yeah, there is a question from Cheryl.
Yep.
I will read it. Can you explain how the queue jumps help the bus to get through the light if the bus is not the first vehicle at the light? Explain how this impacts the rest of the traffic in Homestead and other places along the corridor.
So at times it can be, let me try to get back to that slide. It's really going to depend on a numerous set of factors, and I don't want to get too complicated, but it'll depend on the route being on time. It'll depend on where it is in its service cycle. It'll depend on where it's located, but there will be something on the bus. We already track our buses via GPS, and this is something that PRT is working out within the BRT corridor that's being constructed right now, but really identifies the need for the bus to get its own signal. The intent of the queue jumps is to allow that to be, and it'll be dashed red or highlighted in red and dedicated to buses. So if there's a partial queue, they can get out of general traffic and get into that lane, serve the stop, and then based on the transponders, the GPS, or the interaction with the signal, get a dedicated signal for itself. So this area, we're working through the details, but at Amity and 8th Avenue, there would be a proposal for transit signals themselves that would be different from general traffic signals, and that our operators are already trained on in certain areas We already have them in existence on the South Busway, and there will be components of that taken forward for training as well, that they know that this is a signal for them to either make a turning movement or continue on their route. But there's a lot of factors at play there, and we can give a better breakdown of that going forward for those that want to dig into it. I hope that answered your question a little bit, Cheryl, but if there's more to it that you want to follow up on, please let me know.
Thanks, Seth. Another question from Nicole Gallagher. Curious about the timeline. When can we actually expect to see the improvements? And you mentioned winter of 2023, but is that when we might see some of these improvements start to happen?
So, I don't want to keep kicking the can down the road, but there are things from a signal timing perspective that could potentially happen sooner than possible. And those mean extending pedestrian sidewalk cycles or pedestrian crossing cycles, changing how the cycles work right now. And those the recommendations or how to do that will come out this fall and winter in terms of an implementation plan. And then we'll immediately and actively, even right now, begin working with Homestead or Munhall or anybody else that is a signal owner to begin interacting those changes. And if it's deemed from some of the initial analysis that the whole signal needs to be upgraded, that's where part of that implementation plan will identify things like Green Light Go, which is a state funding program for signal improvements, or other elements of funding that'll really be drawn out and done. So things could come online within the next year or 2 years, but more of the infrastructure, the harder built infrastructure, will really take some time to work with PennDOT for highway occupancy permits, work with PennDOT on some other elements there. So we would like to see them today, but there's going to be a variety and priority in terms of implementation phasing coming out. So more to come, and we'll try to get more details on that as we go forward with the project. Anyone else on the call want to talk about specifics?
No, but in the interim of people maybe having more questions, I want to highlight a question from Joy about the meeting in person tomorrow. Everything that we've seen here in the presentation will be available tomorrow as boards. So you can either zoom in on a specific intersection or get a closer look at some of these conceptual proposals that the team has prepared.
And I see Joy has a follow-up question. Currently, based on the county recommendations from the health department, masks are not required. And at this time, the team will not be wearing masks in that environment. All right.
Any more questions? It is around 12:21 at the moment. So I think we can either stop and give people a couple minutes back of their day.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Once again, I want to thank all the participation today. Please look for us going forward. If you're able and you want to meet us, the team in person that's been working through this, happy to have that discussion tomorrow at the in-person meeting. But I also just want to point to the engagement site once again, engage.rideprt.org/H2M, where all of the things that you've seen today and also some of the existing previous work will be on that page and build out for you to interact with. Please share this far and wide. We want to make sure we haven't missed folks or missed areas that needed to be highlighted, or any considerations that the team needs to be accommodating through this project. And we look forward to continuing to work with our partners and the public going forward. All right, I just want to extend a thank you to the PRT team that has supported this, and our consultants that have been on board, and to thank you for your time. But we look forward to working with you going forward, and happy to see this come to fruition along with you.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow in person. Tell your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, or your stakeholders to join us tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.